It's funny, isn't it? We often think science fiction, well, it's just pure fantasy, spaceships, aliens, all that. But what if those seemingly outlandish visions actually have a real pull, like a significant impact on science and technology in the real world?
Yeah, that's exactly the intriguing question we're tackling today. We're diving into this really fascinating relationship between sci-fi and reality, trying to uncover how these imaginative stories haven't just predicted the future, but have often actively inspired the advancements we see every day.
Right. We've got some compelling articles here that dig into this connection. And our mission, really, for this deep dive is to spotlight those moments, sometimes surprising ones, where fiction became fact. And more than just listing things, we want to get into why this connection is so powerful, to offer you a kind of shortcut to understanding this intersection of imagination and innovation.
Absolutely. Because science fiction, when you look at its place in our culture, it's definitely more than just escapism. It gets into our collective thinking and, we'll explore it. It can genuinely steer the direction of scientific work.
It really can. And its cultural weight is just huge. I mean, think about blockbuster movies. Of the top 5 highest grossing films ever, only Titanic isn't science fiction. That tells you something about its hold on us, right? But this isn't new, is it? This influence goes way back to the very start of filmmaking.
Oh, absolutely. The foundations of cinema as a way to tell stories owe a lot to Georges Méliès. Back around the turn of the 20th century, he was an illusionist, saw the potential for film, for special effects, and just ran with it. He experimented like crazy with this new tech to bring fantasies to life.
And that 1902 film, A Trip to the Moon, just incredible for its time, showing astronomers going to the moon, exploring, fighting moon men even, all in 15 minutes.
It's amazing. And what's really notable isn't just the effects, which were groundbreaking, or the ambitious story for 1902. It's that it's a perfect example of sci-fi imagining something huge decades before it happened. A
Mhm.
Trip to the Moon came out a full 67 years before Neil Armstrong actually walked on the moon. It was hinting at what could be.
67 years. Wow. That really hits home, doesn't it? The power of that vision. It wasn't just entertainment, it was planting a seed. And it strikes me, the influence isn't always like a specific gadget appearing on screen and then popping up in a lab. Sometimes it's more about the concepts science fiction gives us.
Exactly. That's a great point. Take Professor Richard Ellis, the astronomer. He points out that while time travel is this, classic sci-fi trope for over a century, astronomers actually look back in time because light travels at a finite speed. So looking at distant galaxies is looking into the past. So the language of science fiction time travel gives us a way to grasp that real astronomical concept. It makes a complex idea feel more familiar.
That's a really neat way to put it. The sci-fi landscape shapes how we even think about the science.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, there are those much more direct links, gadgets we saw first in fiction that are now just, well, real.
Definitely. And Star Trek is the classic example, isn't it? So many things. Back in the 60s, think about it. Video calls, automatic sliding doors, those flip open communicators, that was all pure imagination.
And now, totally commonplace. Though, yeah, the flip phone itself had its moment and faded a bit, but it's almost like it cycles back, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These new foldable smartphones with flexible screens, they feel like echoes of folding displays we saw in films like Minority Report or even Westworld more recently. The core idea sticks around.
Right. And what's compelling is that cycle. A specific design might fade, but the concept, often seated in fiction, just adapts and comes back in a new form, driven by that initial spark. And sometimes the inspiration is incredibly specific, not just a general idea.
Like the self-lacing shoes. Nike actually made them straight out of Back to the Future Part 2, and they released them in 2016. That's just amazing. Life imitating art, quite literally.
It really is. And it wasn't just a gimmick either. Nike teamed up with Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly. They raised a lot of money for his Parkinson's Foundation. So that fictional tech directly helped a real-world cause. That's a pretty deep connection.
That's a fantastic example of that tangible effect.
Yeah.
And speaking of tangible impacts from seemingly fictional ideas, the black hole simulation for Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, that wasn't just cool visuals, was it? It had serious science behind it.
Oh, absolutely. Nolan brought in Kip Thorne, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, as a consultant. Thorne gave them incredibly detailed equations to make sure the black hole looked and behaved according to well-known physics. As much as possible, anyway.
But turning equations into a picture, especially around a black hole, wasn't easy, right? The visual effects team had to invent new stuff.
That's right. Paul Franklin and his team found that existing software just assumed light travels in straight lines, which, near a black hole, it absolutely doesn't. So they had to develop completely new rendering software, new algorithms, to show how light would actually bend and distort. They had to overcome a basic assumption in computer graphics.
And the result wasn't just a stunning movie effect. It actually led to new scientific understanding.
That's the most remarkable part. The simulation gave them new insights into gravitational lensing, how gravity bends light. Thorne, Franklin, and others actually published 2 technical papers based on the work they did for the film. So the demands of making realistic sci-fi directly pushed forward scientific research by a top physicist.
That's almost hard to believe, a Hollywood movie leading to peer-reviewed science papers. And the simulation stayed relevant, didn't it? I remember people comparing it when we got those first real pictures of a black hole a few years back.
Exactly. When the Event Horizon Telescope released those first images in 2019, everyone immediately saw the resemblance to Interstellar. It highlighted how accurate they'd managed to be. Dr. Ziri Yunsi, who is part of the EHT team, even talked about the comparisons. It really showed the scientific value in that portrayal.
It really does show that powerful link between imagination and science.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen sci-fi inspire gadgets, even drive specific research. Let's shift gears a bit to this idea of VFi, virtual fiction, and the metaverse. It feels like that's the big thing right now, and again, sci-fi seems to have paved the way.
It certainly feels that way. I mean, there's no single definition everyone agrees on for the metaverse, but the general idea is a more immersive internet, right? Digital spaces where we connect, maybe using VR or AR.
And the name itself, metaverse, that comes straight from science fiction, doesn't it? Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash back in '92.
That's the one. And it got a huge boost in public awareness from the movie version of Ready Player One. But yeah, the core idea of really deep, immersive virtual worlds, that's been a staple in sci-fi for a long, long time.
And you actually wrote about this yourself, didn't you? Your novel, Meta Wars, from around 2010.
I did, yeah. It was actually the Icelandic ash cloud chaos back then that sparked it. All the flights grounded. It got me thinking about a global metasphere where people could interact digitally, maybe using brain-computer interfaces, even exploring digital consciousness.
That's fascinating, especially writing it back then.
Hmm.
And while the hardware for VR and AR still feels a bit clunky, maybe, you make a good point that many of us are already kind of living in an early version of it, especially with remote work.
Think about it, right? Anyone spending all day on Zoom or Teams, you're projecting a digital version of yourself, an avatar, into a virtual space. It's limited, sure, but it's still a form of virtual reality. Remember the whole room rater thing during the pandemic? People judging backgrounds? We were engaging with these digital personas in their virtual environments.
I do remember that. That's
Yeah.
a very relatable point. And the big tech companies are obviously betting big on this. Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard, Facebook becoming Meta. These are huge moves aimed squarely at the metaverse, aren't they?
Absolutely. Massive investments. They clearly believe this is the next big platform shift. And, history suggests these things tend towards concentration. A few big players usually dominate.
Like the Pareto principle you mentioned, the 80-20 rule. So we'll probably see a couple of major metaverse platforms emerge, like we did with search or social media.
Very likely. Which, interestingly, makes me think of that David Cronenberg film, Exist Z. It showed a world dominated by these immersive, bio-connected games run by 2 massive rival companies. You could almost see a future like that, maybe with a company like Microsoft in one of those roles. It gets a bit weird when you think how easily fiction and reality can blur for some people, like those completely unfounded beliefs about microchips and vaccines. Shows how tech, fiction, and public perception can get tangled.
It's true, those lines can get really blurry. And on a more day-to-day level, this virtual world is already changing our physical worlds, like ordering food on an app. Restaurant food showing up at your door in minutes. That feels pretty futuristic compared to not long ago.
It really does. Or ride sharing, like Uber or Lyft.
Yeah.
Summoning a car with your phone. It feels like using a magic wand to call a chariot, doesn't it? Compared to how we used to get taxis.
Totally. And even just, instantly sharing photos of your kids with their grandparents overseas. When I was growing up, or like my kids would say, back in the 1900s, you had to get film developed, wait days. What's totally normal now would have sounded like pure science fiction just 20, 30 years ago.
So it really boils down to this question, doesn't it? Will these VFi stories, these metaverse narratives we're seeing now, will they be the actual roadmap for our future? How we live, work, connect? Or will the really ambitious metaverse ideas end up like the flying car, a cool dream that never quite becomes everyday reality?
That is a really compelling question to chew on. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the main takeaway is pretty clear. Science fiction, it's way more than just escapism. It's this incredibly powerful source of inspiration, a place where ideas take root and genuinely shape where science and tech go next. From those early Méliès films to the gadgets in our pockets, and even influencing how scientists study things like black holes or plan for the metaverse, its impact is just undeniable.
Absolutely. So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about, considering all these examples, all this fiction becoming fact. What ideas in science fiction today seem totally out there, totally far-fetched? Which of those might actually be the science fact of tomorrow? And maybe more importantly, what changes in society will come along with them?